It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I can tell already that this article is going to make me twitch. so, um, Someone sent me an article they wanted me to review, and I have a feeling that parts of this may not be favorable. So, I am going to modify the title of the article and not mention the author. That way, there's no blowback from the author or for writing the article. And the context of, I guess I got to give it a title. So the title of the article, or the title that I'm giving the article, is "You Call That a User Story?" So here's the deal. I have seen over the years so many people write doctrine about the one and only correct way to compose a user story. And they go straight to the textbook, blah, 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 that kind of thing. And it drives me crazy. So, user story is a concept that's been around for a very, very long time. But if you don't understand it well, I think that it creates so much confusion between, and I think the easiest way for me to define what a user story really is it's a map. It's a map from what the consumer wants to what the stakeholder perceives the consumer wants to what information they pass along to the product owner to the product owner taking that information and generating a backlog item, and that information being written into a written small queue, and that information being consumed by the team with feedback and questions, and then having them produce what they hope to be the consumer's wish with all those different steps in between. So for me, a user story is a lot like a telephone game. And if you've ever played a telephone game before, the key to doing it successfully, the key to winning is to get rid of as many of those middle steps as you can so that you can get the message or find a way that you can, you know, add value and consistently carry the same story all the way through from beginning to end. Now, the author of this article goes on to say, I'm going to focus on real life experiences instead of conventional bookish topics of what the book says. And then right out of the gate, the person says, from this book, here's what I learned about what a user story is. And they reference things like a product requirements document, a software requirements document. And what I can tell you is that for years, I have seen so many documents that it makes me sick. Now, I'm not saying no documentation is good, but what I am saying is I've seen my fair share of technical user requirements documents. You do the story there. It's the acronym. It's TURD, turd, right? And what I can tell you is that many people want to include everything in that document. And then trying to break that down with the word breakdown structure into stories that actually make sense and are easily consumable is one of the greatest challenges that organizations face. A user story should be short with a simple description of a feature told from the perspective of the person who is desiring a new capability, usually an end user to the customer system. And we want to literally hear their voice in our head. We want to be able to consume it. We want to have a persona in place that identifies exactly what that person looks like, smells like, and desires, right? We can hear their voice in our mind. The end users are typically the customers who will buy or use your product in the end. But they don't necessarily always buy things. Sometimes they just someone who is a recipient of the product that's being used. So if you use Netflix as an example, you might say, if we wrote a story for a feature, let's just call it subscription modality for Netflix, right? Then we could say, who would be the end user? Of course, the person who buys the subscription. So that's the perspective you'd want to write the story based on. And of course, they went straight to the specific and short book structure as a who type of user. That's where you specify who the end user is or whom you're writing the story for. I would like to put your user goal or desire here, what the user actually wants, so that I can achieve a common goal or motive towards the work that's being done in a final destination. This is probably, for someone who said it's not going to be textbook, this is probably as textbook as it could possibly get. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just there are so many other things that you can consider when you're writing stories. And it doesn't always follow that as a who, I like to what, so that why, right? Or as a blank, I want to blank so that I can blank. Also, they go on to mention acceptance criteria now. Acceptance criteria are which things are mandatory that will make the story acceptable or successful so that the product owner can pass them off or so that I will accept them as a user. This is a lot more complex than just a simple sentence like that. And I think that in an effort to try to, keep this under 15 minutes, I might not be able to go too much into acceptance criteria. But we can talk more about Gherkin another time, which is given this scenario when this happens, then I expect this result. And of course, artifacts, any supporting documents, graphs, maps, anything that's going to help bring this story to pass. But I think the big key is what you do before it ever gets to this point. It's how you are mindful, or what should you be mindful of when you're doing almost like pre-steps, if you will. And right out of the gate, we talk about research. So the most important thing is to have a POBAFATA in place so that they can research, figure out what they need to do. Most of the time, honestly, users aren't able to tell you exactly what they want because they don't exactly know what they want. It's a matter of creating and understanding the persona and making sure that the persona directly relates to who our target audience is. Then we can make each story short and concise. A story is very meaningless if you can't finish it in a sprint. So you need to make it short, precise, and to the point. Third, we can follow the three C's. Mike Cohn threw these out there. The first C is the card, making it short and concise, enough to fit on an index card, a conversation, because nothing is a contract, and then a confirmation, how we deem that it's accepted. Fourth, we need to remember that agility is our primary goal. So don't just build stories blindly. If things need to change it. The best stories come from iteratively developing them, not having one person throw there in a gauntlet and say, this is what the story is. Five, and this is one that's hard for, especially for technical product owners, is to don't be overly technical. User story documents should not have all the technical details of exactly how a server will work or how a button will work. Um, it should be contained elsewhere, right? The purpose of the story is to get the technology in place, saying this is what the consumer is trying to do. Sixth, we want to make sure we create a rank order. This is what we're talking about in our last podcast episode. We need to make sure we have some kind of way of getting objective stack ranking and not just ranking things based on high, medium, or low priority. If we're using priority as our only metric, what you're going to find is people will tie priority, they'll hang their hat on importance. So priority equals importance. And if everything's important, then everything becomes a high priority. When in actuality, priority should be tied to urgency, because then you have a whole bunch of important things and you need to figure out which ones are more or less urgent. And then finally, it's keeping things written at the correct level. Um, so user stories and tasks are actually quite different. The user story is what we need, and the task is how it's going to be executed, right? So if you think about it from that perspective, the end recipient doesn't care so much about the task. They care more about that the story is going to be able to be fulfilled. And that in context is what a user story is. Now, the whole thing about making it correct, writing a user story correctly, you call that a user story. That's not a user story. It doesn't have the format. You know, I think the big takeaway here, the big thing to keep in mind is that stories come in many different flavors, types, and sizes. So a story could be a request for an enhancement. A story could be a bug or a defect. A story could be a research item. A story could be a feature. A story could be an enhancement. And a story can be an enabler. So, what I'm trying to say is sometimes when we think about stories, we don't ever think of the type of story, but it's important for us to capture the type of story as well and to understand that different types of stories are going to be prioritized differently, that they're going to be set in rank order differently, and that they're going to be consumed differently. So, it's important to understand that story as a metric or story by definition is not a one size fits all thing because most people don't look good in spandex. So, one size fits all is not ever a good idea. But that's going to do it. I hope that this was insightful. I hope that you learn more about user stories. If you have a topic that you want us to cover, make sure you reach out to us, learnmore@agiledad.com. We would love to hear about your topic and get it on a podcast episode. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.